commentator, Young Voices. Isaac joins us this morning, and we want to talk about a very serious subject, and that is what's happening on our college campuses these days with all of these protests. Our conversation is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Isaac, good morning.
Hey, Todd. How are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. It's good to have you with us. And Grove City, of course, is long renowned for its conservatism, yes, but more importantly for its keen eye for what's going on in terms of politics across the United States. So what is behind all of this? Because we're hearing things that you just don't hear in America.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so one of the great, we've had a couple brushes with the Ivies. We compete against them in a couple of different things, but it's funny. I'm starting to realize we may have gotten the better end of that deal, seeing how things are going at Columbia and Yale and Harvard. So it's interesting. So yeah, this whole situation at Columbia and elsewhere across America, but specifically at Columbia, it's revealing a thing about America's elite university that's very much not elite, which is their ability to maintain control of their own campus and rhetorically deal with really radical protesters. So President Shafiq Monday puts out a statement, and she talks about she is deeply saddened by what's happening on the campus as protesters are taking over parts of campus. They've created a tent city in the middle of campus that the NYPD has been unable to breach or unwilling to breach, right? So the president of Columbia is deeply saddened. I need you to be more than deeply saddened, right? Mm-hmm. Your university's seriousness and its legitimacy are being threatened by the most ridiculous kind of pro-Palestine and in many cases pro-Hamas activism to the point where protesters are encamped and creating an environment of intimidation for students and professors at Columbia based on their cultural identity, right? This is not deeply saddening. This is deeply stupid, right? It's also deeply concerning because the Columbia situation is stretching more than just the university's social bonds or anything like that, right? It's stretching the future of the institution and the future of the Ivies more generally because, tell me honestly, Todd, if you're watching this go down at Columbia, you're watching people getting pulled off the green at Yale for trespassing as part of pro-Hamas demonstrations, are you even thinking for a minute about sending your kid there? No, you're not. We may be, and I'm trying to pretend that I'm sad about this, we may be witnessing the fall of the Ivy Leagues.
Trying to pretend that you're sad about that. That's an interesting way to put it. Is it any different, though? And maybe it's better to put it in this light. Didn't we teach them this just a couple of years ago with Portland and Seattle and Minnesota and that civil disobedience and taking over and burning down government buildings? It really, this is something that we taught them to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've legitimized a lot of things. I mean, the irony right now is that progressive, anti-Israel protesters are claiming that their free speech is being abridged by what's happening at Columbia, by them being arrested for things that are not free speech, like trespassing. It's interesting, right? Because this is the same progressive movement that's told us for a long time that words are violence, and that silence is violence, but also words that you don't like are violence. But now, when they're espousing actual violence and glorifying the events of October 7th and the barbaric achievements of Hamas, right, all of a sudden that's not violence. That's free speech that needs to be protected. It's an interesting dichotomy. I think it's endemic of the special pleading that a lot of these progressive groups tend to espouse. But I want to talk about this in a kind of a maybe more of a personal lens, in the sense of, right, most of these student activists, they're college students, right? And I'm 22, right? So I want to talk about this in the sense of, as a young person who's involved in politics, like myself, there comes a point where you can either hide behind the excuse of being a young person, or you can try to actually put in the work and put forth a serious argument, right? And it seems like that's the dichotomy of many pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas protesters right now, right? You can hide behind the excuse of ignorance and youth. And honestly, if you've never studied the issue, I wouldn't guilt people too much for that. Like, people who are 21 who just aren't political and don't study the issue, I'm not going to guilt them for that. But you don't get to do that as you're marching through the streets and chanting "Hamas, make us proud," while carrying a Stanley Cup because you're a very privileged Ivy League troglodyte. At that point, you've become participatory in political discussion. And at that point, these protesters have become open to the very real and completely accurate criticism that, at best, they're uninformed bigots. At worst, they are open anti-Semites. And when those are your only two options, it's worth taking a hard look in the mirror at exactly what kind of person political activism has turned you into.
Isaac, how do we turn this around? How do we get back to being the America that we grew up with?
The America you grew up with. I grew up with this America, right? So it's, one, we should expel a lot of these people. Like, I'm sorry, if you get arrested, we can talk about arrests, we can talk about the First Amendment. There are legitimate concerns and questions to be had there, right? Mere pro-Palestinian speech is not hate speech. We can talk about all that. But if you get arrested as part of this, yeah, you should probably be expelled. I think there's a pretty workable case that you should be expelled from the university. This is not the purpose of college. It never was. It never will be, as long as the American system of education, of higher education exists. How do we turn it around? I mean, there's a couple things, right? So one is we have to realize that not all of this is rooted in deep malice, right? So there's an old saying, never attribute to malice what you can to stupidity. And so when you're looking at this situation in Colombia and you're trying to figure out the proportion of malice to stupidity, you have to realize that a lot of people my age who are chanting pro-Hamas slogans do not have the foggiest idea what they're referring to when they chant about the river, the sea, or the Jews. Right? The reason they're mad and the reason they're marching is because an Instagram infographic or a TikTok video told them that supporting Hamas was synonymous with being a good person, or that calling for divestment from Israel, as they have at Colombia, is an effective or serious way to virtue signal. They're wrong, right? And in fairness, some of them actually mean it. Some of them are actually anti-Semitic. But let's not pretend like this is entirely the product of malice. Some of it, a lot of it, comes from stupidity. But the problem with that is, and I cannot stress this enough, if we are having to have the discussion of, is it malice or stupidity that's calling the shots at Ivy League universities in America, I think it's a real testament to how far this has fallen.
And it has fallen a very, very far place, and to a very, very dark place for America. And really, there's a generational thing going on here as well, is there not?
I think so, yeah. I think, every young generation, people my age, tend to be more prone to political activism because we're young and, by and large, stupid. I, of course, am the lovely exception to this. Not a single opinion of mine has ever been wrong. But, it's a thing, right? When you're 20 and you have, especially when you're a 20-year-old dude, you have a lot of testosterone. Yeah, you go and you get in riots and you set stuff on fire because it's fun, right? That's just the nature of being young. But the problem is that that's not how it should be, right? And I think how do we turn this around? One, we have to be very clear about what they're actually calling for, right? When they say from the river to the sea, or when they say Hamas make us proud, or when they scream at Jewish students and professors that they'll repeat October 7th for 10,000 years, we need to be very clear what it is they're advocating for, even if they're not clear on what they're advocating for. We need to be swift and categorical in our rejection for that, because that is genocide, and there's not a single excuse for it. I think the other thing we have to realize is that there are a lot of legitimate arguments for maintaining the human rights of Palestinian people that are being washed up in this conflict, right? So when you look at the most virulently anti-Semitic protests at Columbia University, think about that. Let's say you're an ordinary American that simply has questions and concerns about the human rights of Palestinians Palestinian civilians who had nothing to do with October 7th and are now paying the price under Israel's new counteroffensive, right? Let's say that you're the kind of American who has questions about that or concerns about that, and that means something to you. That's a human rights concern to you, and it's a human rights concern to me, right? Mm-hmm. Your cause has now been hijacked by the most loud-mouthed, foul-mouthed, ideologically vapid, obnoxious sort of people. And any hope you might have had of the legitimacy of your cause being recognized is very quickly being diminished through the idiotic machinations of the loudest people in the room, right? And I think this is kind of what President Biden was the difference he was trying to split when he made this statement about, I condemn anti-Semitism, but you must understand the Palestinian view too. I don't think he means that you have to understand the pro-Hamas view, because I have no interest in understanding the pro-Hamas view. The pro-Hamas view should be in the dirt, face down, dead. But when he's talking about the pro-Palestinian view, we have to understand that there are human rights concerns on both sides of this conflict. Do I think he said that very well? No. Do I think the timing of that really belies that he was caring about it as opposed to it being a political gambit? Absolutely not. But we have to remember, when you think about activism tends to take relatively defensible statements and turn them into utterly indefensible ones. So the notion of we should respect the human rights of Palestinian people, even as we're defending Israel's right to defend itself. That's a defensible statement, but it gets blown up when you put it in the context of campus activism. It gets blown up into Israel's a genocidal state and shouldn't exist. Like, you think about like the actual trajectory of these demands, right? We went from ceasefire now, that was right after October 7th, right, to the Israeli state is rooted in genocide and we should dismantle it and we should divest from it and they're all evil white colonizers. We went from 1 to 2 really, really fast, right, because that's what activism does. That's especially what progressive activism does, is that it takes defensible demands and it takes real human rights concerns and it covers them with just this veneer of bull that just renders it indefensible and destroys meaningful ideological progress or the ability to talk to other people. That's the toxicity of activism.
We only have a moment left here with Isaac Willour. Isaac, as violent as America has become in recent years, is it going to take something that is really going to result in mass problems, mass violence, in order for us to finally shake free of what's going on?
Oh man, we're hitting all the optimistic hits this morning. I like it. So I think possibly, yeah. I mean, if depending on the outcome in 2024, I mean, both of our political parties have ended up in a moment where neither side can accept the other's electoral victory as legitimate. I think, to be totally honest with you, yeah, I think there might be violence. I have no plans to travel to D.C. in January of 2025. I would recommend you wouldn't either. I think there's a relatively high chance, but I'm trying to maintain a cautious optimism, right? And it's hard, right? I think we're in a really tough spot as a country right now, and it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But you know what? That's been the case at a lot of moments in our country's history, and we've always survived them, even if it's been at tremendous cost. We've survived a lot of things because we're the greatest country on earth, even if we're having a rough spot. And even now, when it's hard to believe that, we have to keep that in mind. It will get worse, but I think it will get better at the end of the day. Activism is also exhausting. You can't do this crap forever.
He is Isaac Willour, but that's a great way to end this conversation this morning. Commentator, Young Voices. He's from Grove City College. Isaac, thanks for the time this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Y'all take care.
There's Isaac Willour with us here this morning, a young person's perspective on what's happening on these campuses all across our nation.